Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to news in EVE Online, I got another update last week which brought Summon the Swarm to the game, so there is capital gameplay that you can now do in nullsec. I'm not sure how much it's run. I think the initial response has been that the cost of the beacon is relatively high, although you are getting a better reward for it. There is of course a risk reward system in play there as well, which means that for the moment people are not massively flocking to the activity, it seems. Well, we will see of course how it evolves, because in my opinion most of these nullsec blocks are still basically in the rebuilding phase, where they're re-establishing themselves in their homes. If they can find ways to again set up umbrellas and things like that to protect their space, we may see a lot more swarms being summoned in nullsec soon. Another thing is that the taxes are back, so they're still relatively high, but they've basically switched. So the biggest part now is, I think, on the completion of a transaction. That one went up substantially, but overall I think if which is the same tax that you also have to pay in full in the player-owned trade hubs. And so with perfect skills and with full standings with the station here in GTA 4.4, or any NPC station really, trading there is just about as good as trading in a player-owned trade hub with the lowest possible taxes. So it's interesting. We will see how all of that evolves, and of course in a moment we'll see if there's an impact on the market. You may already have spotted it, but looks like Plex has massively responded to that fact. Next up, we've got a quick look at the New Eden store. Let's take a look at what's happening here. We do have a sale happening. Interesting. Revelation, Nidhogger, Archon, Phoenix. That makes sense actually. Summon the Swarm, so you're back out there in Carriers and Dreadnought. And so some skins for those are on sale at the moment. Couple of bundles, not spotting anything else of note. And then for the services, just no sales or anything special to report there as well. That means that we get to move on to the market. We, as always, start with the Plex market, and that's coming in at the 235 mark. Alright, let's hope that stays. Yeah, it's okay. Let's move. Here is Plex, and so you may have noticed that on the ticker already above 3 million ISK for the sellers in GTA 4.4 for the first time in quite a while. You can see that on the chart here. We definitely have a breakout and a one-year high point with the averages closing in on 3 million, and you can also see that we get the wide gap between the 5-day and the 20-day moving average. But for the bad news, you can also see that the trade volumes are down substantially, about 4 days, 5-6 days ago actually, and that is of course the tax changes on the day of the patch that have hit trading quite hard and have basically jumped the prices up all of a sudden. So this is not really part of the general trend, I would say, but there's definitely an exacerbation of the trend that's happening now due to Plexus. So I would not be surprised if we hit that above 3 million mark and then we start to move sideways a little bit, so that the market can really think about, all right, we've re-established ourselves after the tax changes, but what are we going to do next? And so the sellers are up to almost 3.1 million. Take a quick look at the player-owned trade hubs. So that one has basically become competitive now. With GTA 4.4, I think we'll see a more balanced picture on this one, as especially players with not perfect standings and perhaps with not the full skill strength will have an advantage trading in the Tranquility Trading Tower. But yeah, 3.1 million pretty much for the sellers and 295 million for the buyers, or buyers have moved to perimeter, because I do think that there's an advantage to buying in the Tranquility Trading Tower, and then some of them apparently have to get used to setting the range to 1 jump for their buy order. So everyone has to basically catch up again to the tax changes from CCP. The multiple pilot train certificate, massive response yet again. You can see how the volumes went down, but the price went up above 1.5 billion, above 1.5 by quite a bit for the sellers, and 135 billion for the buyers. Availability is not that great. Well, obviously for people that held stuff, this is pretty damn good news, because you are getting a massive increased price, but you'll have to give some of that back through the taxes, of course. These skill extractors, again, this is going to become a trend, I think, in the plex stuff category above 350 million. 350 million for the sellers, 342 million for the first buyer, so pretty narrow margin, but 1 year high point yet again. And then the impact on the injectors, large skill injector, alright, definitely a little bit of something that we would have perhaps expected this one to start to shoot up as well on the activity of plex and the general tax change, but doesn't seem to be the case, probably because we were at a 1 year high point as well. We just reached the 680 million mark, and so we're at 688 for the sellers, 650 million for the buyers. More healthy margin, I would say, than during the increase in price, but I do think that the taxes are basically going to allow large scale injectors to defend that 680 million mark a little bit more easily, and so we are in all likeliness going to see that hesitation bear out here as well, but a pullback to like 570 will be far harder to materialize now. Small scale injectors do have that response. They've got that little bit of extra volatility that was happening, and so while the the large scale injectors were basically starting to move sideways here on that 680 mark, the small scale injector said 140, 1 year high point. That's a little bit too much. Some selling pressure was driving the price back down, but as I was saying, I do think that we are going to keep things in check now because of the tax changes, and you can see the response here has been to just go back to that 140, 1 year high point, probably a slight downside here on the volumes in all of this as well. 140 for the sellers and a 134 million for the buyers, so that margin opened up obviously because of those increased taxes yet again. Where I am expecting a higher price is then the daily alpha injectors, and no, alright, that's definitely interesting as well. Flat for the month here so far in October, at above 45 million ISK. It's 48 for the sellers, 42.5 for the buyers. I would say that it's still relatively expensive, but sort of, if we, I can't say that this is always a definite correlation, but if we see this as increased interest from alpha players into the game, we see that perhaps we're stalling a little bit after the August-September offensive, of course, where CCP did come out with the Gateway Quadrant. Not entirely surprising. I myself am in the exact same state. What's next, right? Everyone, I think, is looking forward to the final quadrant. What's the name going to be? Here and there in some of the descriptions that we've had for the next quadrant, it was like a new age or something like that. Wordings that did make us expect like some very interesting, very innovative new stuff. So I'm really curious about it, and it looks like to me the market is basically also starting to come into that holding pattern a little bit of, all right, CCP, hit us with what's next. Right now everyone is like, bets are made, let's go. Then we've got the hypercores, finally, that did shoot up. That is to be expected. In my opinion, a far closer gauge to actual inflationary pressures and monetary policy, you could say, is definitely hypercores, plex, skill extractors, multiple power trading certificates, as they are the closest to a conversion to real life money. And thus I think that they have that immediate response. In the injectors there is this speculative part of, all right, but will we need a lot of skill points, or will players want to invest in a lot of skill points in the current market situation or game situation? So that's always a little bit different. But yeah, the hypercores also jumping up to 1 year high point, 320,000 almost for the sellers, still 290 for the buyers. So that margin has opened up as well, because your trades are now more expensive. Let's move on then to the minerals, coming in at 920. There we go. We start with titanium, and here that's definitely continued pressure, right? 4.5 ISK since the absorption, you could say, of the industry changes. Most of the summer holding on quite well, but at the tail end here we definitely are going down towards 4 ISK as a more as a floor for titanium. It's 4, let's go to JITA itself on this one for the sellers, 421 for the sellers, 410 for the buyers. It's definitely a pretty narrow margin between sellers and buyers, and there's a 1.4 billion unit buy order up in JITA as well, which should give us a pretty strong floor to not break the 4 ISK, but it's pretty obvious that 4 to 4.5 seems to be the new range for titanium for now. Last week it looked like most of them perhaps were starting a resurgence, but it looks like for titanium at least that's not the case. Pyrite though, that's a slight bit better, although at the tail end we are going back down, where we have that 5-day moving average staying above the 20-day moving average for most of last week, and so we're talking 17.13 for the sellers, 16.28 for the buyers, 16 to 17 ISK. Let's get 17.5 here. We're definitely still below again that pre-September average number, so the pressure is still there. There's no breakout or full recovery to be spotted just yet in these high-SiC minerals, and Mixalon I think will be in pretty much the same vein. Yeah, we could play with 60 as a high price through the summer, but now you can see that we're still slowly edging away from that. 57 is for the sellers and 54 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, so despite the tax policies that have changed, that you would expect to see perhaps some slightly bigger margins between sellers and buyers here, that is still very narrow on that downwards pressure. If we move on to low-SiC, we have the Isogen chart that does another breakout. That's pretty good for people that are, you know, that have made predictions and that are looking forward to that happening. Now, this will probably have been engaged by the tax changes as well, but yeah, my theory I think still holds that Isogen has been too low in price through May, June, the entire summer, and even September, because the supplies are still old stocks that needed to be absorbed by the market. This is a pretty big breakout. Sellers are coming in at 87 ISK, buyers are above 80 ISK all of a sudden. There still is here a seller of 90 million units, 16, 20 million units. Those still feel like, all right, this is probably here in 56 real listings from you know, holders of those old Isogen stocks that are happening here, but they're wising up to everything that's happening. There's even someone setting up a bet that within 3 months we'll hit 500 ISK for Isogen. I think that's pretty aggressive, but if you would ask me to make like an upper bound prediction, that is definitely a possibility. Let's forget we're not mining Isogen from high-SiC anymore, and so this one is basically betting on 5 times the price or so within the next 3 months. So that's just how you should read that this sell order. But a lot of them are definitely starting to push up, right? We got a big volume at 90, then we get some volumes coming in at 90 to 100, and then at above 100 we get at 150 we get another 50 million units. So yeah, those holders are starting to see that writing on the wall as well, as in all likeliness their stocks are starting to lower. I do think that consumption at these prices is lower than active production of Isogen, and so we get a very impressive jump here all of a sudden, probably helped by the tax changes, as that would have been a very good time to probably just do your quick relistings, because well, you don't want to be too low in price either and then stuck in the new tax system. So that's probably what's happening here. But yeah, good to see that my prediction on this is coming out. I'm not sure if we'll see 500 within 3 months, but the upwards pressure, to me, it still does make sense, since the price is way closer to the Mixalon price than it is to our next low-SiC mineral. Here is Noxium. That is still, you know, this feels like a chart that is responding to an active supply-demand situation with a bit of pressure at the tail end, but in a completely different range from Isogen, 1000 to 1250 for Noxium, making it that most expensive Tech 1 mineral. 1074 for the sellers and still above 1000 for the buyers. So this is a little bit of pressure though, definitely at the low end of its range at the moment. And that to me does tell the story that Isogen is still in a completely different situation and is working through something in order to find its range on active supply, active creation of Isogen and consumption. Moving on to nullsec, we get a bit of upwards pressure here on Zydrine. To me, also sort of to be expected on these tax changes, should put some upwards pressure on at least some of these items. And yeah, something that's imported, that all of it needs to be brought from far away from Jita, then they are going to, of course, try and sell it at a better price, and they want to recuperate their taxes, which can be done if you basically dominate the transactions, which the sellers do for Zydrine. 930 ISK for the sellers, 846 for the buyers, and so also an opening up of a bit of margin between sellers and buyers. And then for Megasite, we also basically see a reversal, right? We're up slightly in the last 5 days or so. Volumes are way down, and we are at 574 for the sellers, 550 for the buyers. Again, a slight uptick in the sell prices, a bit of margin that has opened up between sellers and buyers. And I mean, don't expect any of this to change too soon, since it's coming from nullsec, and so Megasite and Zydrine are completely dominated by those sellers that dictate the price, and so they have the opportunity to quickly respond to these tax changes. Then finally, the one that I forgot last week, shame on me, is Morphite. Still very flat, actually slightly upwards in the last month or so, but staying below 75,000 ISK, 73,000 for the sellers and 68,000 almost for the buyers. Not as expensive as the run-up until CCP finally said that's enough for Morphite, we're gonna make a little bit more available into the game. And still, for me, honestly, not something that I would be investing in. I still do think that if CCP is going to hit the mineral market with the end of scarcity, that Morphite at 75,000 ISK or 70,000 ISK is on the radar way more than, let's say, Tritanium at 4 ISK or even Isogen that's going up at the moment. I don't think that they'll increase the availability of these minerals that much, but Morphite is still a candidate. Historically speaking, 10,000 has been like a reference price for me. Below that I would buy as investing, and then I would constantly see spikes and volatility create sell opportunities from that price range. And of course, we're still crazy off into stratospheric heights for the Morphite price. So I still think that this could just be the start, and that this was just there, like maybe a first injection to see how does it respond. We're making this much Morphite available in a very steady system, so that's the price response. And I'm still, you know, my theory is that CCP, that big change will be a dynamic resource system, and so perhaps we'll have like rolling Morphite supplies potentially that will find their way through the universe as they are then exploited, sometimes perhaps overexploited, and that could all have an impact on this price. That's my read on that first little move that CCP did here with the availability of Morphite and ice. Alright, next up we've got PI, but first I have to drink a little bit. There we go. Let's get started with the timestamp coming in at 18 minutes. And we start, as always, with the broadcast nodes. That very interesting, right? Spike to 1 year high point of 2 million, coming back down, but demand is basically strong enough to keep us above the 175 million range on the chart for that 5-day moving average. 1.8 million almost for the sellers and above 1.7 as well. Very narrow margin, and so here even the tax changes hardly made an impact on the price. And I think it's just, this is, you know, hard-coded demand. If you want to make capital ships, if you want to make bigger ships, you need broadcast nodes. This creates a set of demand, and thus, you know, there's always going to be buyers willing to buy at certain price ranges. So let's see if the smaller stuff is responding. Okay, this is definitely interesting. Construction blocks trying to make its way back to 8,000 ISK. From my perspective, 10k is the normal price. So this brings the losses down to like 20% on its historical average price. 8,000 for the sellers, 7.6 for the buyers. Definitely a little bit of a turnaround from the summer, where we lost like 40% on the reference price at the low end and hardly managed to make it above 7. So And this is the first sign that perhaps a little bit more ISK is flowing into PI at this point. Consumer electronics, well, that one is belying me, since that one is still stuck at the 6,000 ISK range, which I think is almost like a 50% loss for consumer electronics, if I remember correctly. 12,500 or something like that would be my reference point for consumer electronics. So still 6,200 for the sellers, 5,700 for the buyers, and just not budging for a month straight at this relatively low price point. Coolants, this one is completely backed. Above 10k was also my reference price for coolants, historically speaking. So very interesting to see that the first run up has then cause a bit of a, all right, whoa, we can sell at 10,000 ISK, bring in the coolants. We've been hoarding that stuff for a very long time. This includes me. In Omar, I have sold quite a decent chunk of my coolants actually. That crashed the price back down to 9,000 ISK, but look at the market response. Looks like the market is very hungry for coolants at the moment. We're back at 11,000 ISK for the sellers, 9,700 for the buyers. Your best sell opportunity in years, if I'm not mistaken, for your coolants. So that's very cool to see, and that one chuck it up to slightly increased demand, more ISK flowing into PI finally. Cryoprotectant solutions have fully absorbed the what was, in my opinion, a speculative move on the price run up here. That was done because someone was expecting, and maybe it was kind of my fault, because I did put a theory out there that the gateway quadrant would just be a short quadrant, a transitional quadrant, and we had absolutely no idea what was coming, and so that an implant introduction would have made sense to me in that quadrant. And so maybe I kind of sparked that speculative bubble here, although it happened mostly after things were announced, so maybe not. But in general, right, I think this was like, it's got to go higher, never materialized, and so now supplies have caught up again. We're back at 100,000 for the sellers, 93,000 for the buyers, so it's back on the same story. For me, that's definitely a good buy. If you want to be ready for an implant announcement from CCP, you want some cryoprotectant solutions that you bought below 100,000 ISK. Enriched uranium tied to fuels, not able to keep all of its gains, and this is still, in my opinion, not a great price, because 12,500 for enriched uranium would be my reference range, 9,000 almost for the sellers, 8,000 for the buyers. Yeah, another 30% loss or something like that. 1/4, 25% loss compared to my reference price. So this one is not doing that great still, compared to coolants at least. Then integrity response drone still has that annoying data point there, but 175 million, and sellers are above 1.7, buyers also above 1.7. That's interesting. So pretty narrow margin, getting to 1.8 pretty quickly on the sellers, showing again that there is very strong demand, willingness to pay some of the more expensive advanced PI materials at 1.7 million. There's like enough demand. If I can grab that and put it into a carrier, it's worth it. So that has completely changed that dynamic, whereas most other PI materials are still struggling to get regular prices. These have that extra demand that's definitely helping them. Mechanical parts did also run up to 8,000 ISK in about 1.5 months from a one-year low point of 6k, so that's a nice recovery. Supplies come in, crash the price, but we are back up yet again. 7,800 for the sellers, 7,100 almost for the buyers. It's still not a good price. I mean, you should see 10k is a normal price, just like coolants. I think they're pretty equivalent when it comes to how easy it is to make these. Then we get nanites doing some more jumps, but yeah, 5,000 ISK is super cheap still. 5,000 for the sellers, 4,700 for the buyers. Also one that, you know, buy at the low point, so that if there is an implant announcement, you are ready for that. Nano factories next, continuing their decline. All right, not exactly what we were expecting, but making their way back towards 700,000 ISK after a very nice run up in September. Not sure why that is. Perhaps The types of ships that require these now are less in vogue. 700, so 800,000 pretty much for the sellers, 730 for the buyers. This to me does feel like a full pullback towards a low point we've seen before. So buying the very cheapest ones at this point may actually make sense from an investment standpoint. Organic mortar applicators, trying to hold on, 800,000 for the sellers, 720 for the buyers. Bit of margin opening up, that could be the taxes coming in, of course. Recursive computing module, also an annoying data point, but staying above $1 million. Yep, 1.1 for the sellers, almost 1.1 for the buyers. It's definitely still very strong demand here. Robotics is continuing to go back up a little bit, but yeah, 100k is its normal price. 65,000 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers is still very cheap, although we're definitely pulled away from the bottom range. Self-harmonizing power cores, bit of pressure, but staying at 1.5. Yeah, just above that for the sellers, just below that for the first buyer. So that story is just being confirmed. Sterile conduits did pull back quite a bit to 900,000 disk, but is slightly moving up. Above $1 million again for the sellers, below 900,000, just below for the buyers. So that's a bit of margin. I think taxes are playing their part as well in some of these actions. And then we get to Yukomi superconductors, flat at, well, I mean, I don't want to say good range, but considering this 1 year chart, this is actually a decent range. 75,000 for the sellers, 68 for the buyers. And then finally the wetware mainframes that are still also that 175 million, pretty much that for the sellers, and less than 100,000 is below that for the buyers. So again, narrow margin, very strong demand for most advanced BI materials. Let's take a look next at advanced moon materials, coming in at 26 minutes. Alright, let's get started with the carbide materials. Galente, we've got crystalline carbide, carbonite, excuse me, slightly down for the week, but basically, you know, it's still the same story. After the volatility that was sparked by the industry changes, we've absorbed that, but for the carbides we moved into that higher range. Basically, you could say 125 to 175 before, 175 to 200 now seems to be the case, 182 to 178. Narrow margin, so slight downward pressure on more supplies, but definitely no change in the trends. Then we've got for Caldari, always have to look for that one a little bit. It is here, titanium carbide, same story, slightly downwards pressure just below 200 disk, but before the range was around 150. 190 for the sellers, 183. So on that downwards pressure, we're just closing the gap. I do think that this will be absorbed again and will move back to 200 soon. Then we've got Fernite carbide for Minmatar, right? Previous range 125-ish. Range after that just below 175. Complete stability, so there's not that much more to tell. Tungsten carbide, that one is breaking the trend a little bit by going back down below 175, so again some pressure, but let's not keep in mind most of the first part of the chart before industry changes and its announcement was a 125 to 150 range. So this to me still holds, especially if we can absorb that and get back on that 175 range, then you know, the margin is definitely still there. Not a lot of demand for tungsten carbide at the moment, which may be the reason why last week we saw that a couple of Amar Tech2 ships were in buy opportunity. Then we've got our metamaterials. Let's get started with photonic. Very nice chart if you're looking for stability. So we do have a September spike that was very quickly absorbed, and we're right back at our 11-12k range for photonics, 11.9 and 11.8 for the buyers. So very narrow margin, right, I would say, on the consensus price. Then we've got our nonlinear for Caldari. Again, this is, you know, a wavy pattern, nicely centered around 20,000 disk. Nothing special to report, we're right back on the average. For our Minmatar brethren, it's plasmonic metamaterials. holding strong, perhaps even slightly above average, close to 20,000 ISK, 18 for the sellers and almost 18,000 for the buyers. So there might be a little bit more interest in Minmatar production out there at the moment, but overall, you know, if you're looking for a stable chart that even managed to absorb two war-related spikes, because that's what this was economic warfare, since at the time, if I'm not mistaken, the Imperium flew and produced the Minmatar Tech-2 cruiser as part of their doctrine, and so that was this. If we can basically imagine how nicely we absorbed that one here. The first one did take a little bit of time, but we very nicely absorbed that one, and so in general, very stable, very nice and stable material, despite everything that happened over the last year with scarcity, industry changes and all that stuff. Then we get terahertz metamaterials for Amar. Finally, is that one also falling off? Well, no, it's back, staying above 15k, bit below, bit above. One spike here in April. Obviously, the industry changes, a little bit speculation there, but overall, again, easily absorbed and pretty damn stable. So that's the metamaterials, and then the other advanced materials have generally been suffering from very low prices, since I think those are basically oversupplied a little bit at the moment still. Fermionic condensates finds a new plateau, so definitely pulling up from that 1 year low point of 50k, but still very cheap relatively speaking, 64 to 61. Ferrogel tried to make a break for it, tried to go to 35,000, but to no avail. The market said, no, we're gonna bring you back towards 30,000, and buyers are probably, yeah, just still above that. That's interesting. Another really narrow margin, despite the tax changes there, 30,240 to 30,100. That's not a lot. So landing nicely on 30,000 ISK. Fullerite made its way above 750. Before that, 1,000 ISK and above was a normal price. So again, same story. Hypersynaptic fibers staying below 9,000 ISK. I think the chart says it all. Nano transistors, again, another one that did try a break. We're going back to 5,000 ISK, and then there's just so much stuff still lying around there that supplies come in, and very quickly we're back below 4,000 ISK. Buyers are again pretty close to those sellers though, so that's interesting. I am seeing a little bit of demand show up here all of a sudden, which I did not expect. That could hopefully at least stabilize the market, that we don't go back to 1 year low points. Phenolic composites was slightly different. This one did manage to get a nice boost and buffer from the industry changes, a little bit of extra demand. Basically, if we look at where we started off last year, that has been completely negated at this point. 1582, again 1550, very uncharacteristically small margin here, I would say, for something that is quite often has that volatility. I did not expect buyers to go up this close. Reinforced carbon fiber, we can take a look at the margin on this one though. 12,480, 11,670, that's a little bit more normal. 11,690 to 11,000, maybe slightly low here as well. But yeah, these new items are, you know, very stable, and for now there's not that much to tell about them. And then we finally have ceramic fibers. Same story, I think, on like announcing potential industry changes. This one did another run up to 500 ISK, managed to keep that premium for yeah, halfway through the summer, and then did well in September as well. But at the tail end, you can see we basically are back where we started. All those gains are gone. 335 to 305, a bit more normal of a margin here as well. So this is an interesting thing though. A lot of these other advanced materials that are at really low prices, well below average of what we usually know them as, are seeing super narrow margin between sellers and buyers, where before, right, they would easily push to low points like here and here. Now we are starting to see a little bit of a stronger floor come up here. So we'll see what that means, hopefully, in the next few weeks and months. Next up, we've got the Tech-2 ships coming in at 3320. Let's take a look at these. Oh, maybe I should show this. Buy orders. I did try to buy this vehicle at 39 million, putting my money, a little bit of money, where my mouth is, and then my holdings. I still have the Manticore, which I'd completely forgotten about actually. But let's go take a look here. As always, we start with our Basilisk. That's seeing a little bit more pressure. We're touching 200 million on the chart, but are the buyers dropping off? 207 for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. If we go below 190, I would say that that's the opportunity. That's what I would be waiting for, but you see that competition for the cheaper Tech 2 ships is definitely very strong. Cerberus, okay, all right. Very interesting. We went below 200 million ISK on the chart, and that did seem to, for the first time in quite a while, spark some volatility, which is what we want in the Tech 2 ship market. Now, it's still, you know, not a huge move or anything like that, but we are talking 240 million for the sellers, 204 for the buyers. So they're very careful, but you can imagine here that about a week ago you could have bought below 200 million ISK and you can now sell at 240 million ISK. That is definitely a trade with some profit in it. We haven't seen that in a long time. So I'm very happy to see this move from the Cerberus. Let's hope that it's the start for more, and it kind of confirms that when you're touching these low points, that's your buy opportunity. And now, yeah, this gives me hope, I would say. There was something beeping, but all right, let's keep going. So this gives me a little bit of hope that we are going to start to see volatility return to the market. The Guardian, I think, was in buy opportunity last week, and look at that. Could have definitely bought well below 180 million. Prices are up now to 188, so it's still not a lot for the sellers. 175 for the first buyer, coming in with 29 units. But you know that those low points are starting to attract attention, and there's a little bit of moves that are starting to be made on this market. That's really good news. So if last week you followed Eve Talk, you definitely had the opportunity to buy Guardians at the bottom of the chart, of at least what it seems to be forming at the moment. The Hound, also just too late, guys. I think we spotted that one last week as well. By going down, started to look interesting. It's always on the left side of this downtrend that you've got your best chance to pick up a cheap buy order. Now you can clearly see that we started our move, our turnaround here, as we broke 22.5. So again, very important to note that we are breaking those low points we haven't seen in like 10 months, but then the market response is quite severe. 24 back for the sellers, 21.2 for the buyers. So you might still have a slight sell opportunity, but the bad news is you can see where the average price has now moved to today, which means that for these buyers it's going to be way harder to actually grab a Hound close to 21 million than it was last week or just 3-4 days ago. Next up, Ichthyosaur. Take a quick look at our Triglavian situation. Still expensive, but on the chart at least not massively expensive or embargoed or anything like that. 640 million for the sellers, 583 for the buyers. Regular margin as well, I would say. The Ishtar went quite low and is starting to move back up as well, so definitely I think a low point that I said looks kind of interesting if you want to make an investment. Let's take a look at like the lowest average price, 190 million. We're at 200 for the first seller, 204 for most, and still 190 for the buyers. This is, you know, a slow uptrend, not the volatility that we would love to see, but that also means that you still have a chance to buy your Ishtar well below 200 million. Not the very best price, I think, but you can still go close to 190, which I think would make sense if you're absolutely looking for that investment. Although all of this for now, we'll have to see by next week, I think, if the Hound can do anything. Yeah, don't expect volatility to all of a sudden be back in general and we're back at like 40% every week or something like that. Those kinds of moves I don't think are in the books just yet. So my buying is still definitely with a medium to longer term trend in mind. Then we've got the Manticore that went up to 30 million ISK, is moving back down. So unfortunately this is way too narrow a range to do a lot of trading. So just I would say wait for the chart to break that 25 million. Be on top of that. On the downside, you'll probably be able to buy your cheapest manticores then. 29 million for the sellers, just below 25 million for the buyers. Then we've got the Munin, slight move up to 230. Okay, well, we haven't seen this type of upswing or this type of you know, sharp upswing on the chart in a long time. It's still very narrow. It's not as good as this one. It's not as good as these 1, 2, 3 moves, but at least it's there for the first time again. 222 million for the sellers, 197 for the buyers. And then we get the Nemesis. Yeah, that's flat in no man's land, right in the middle of everything. So that's a no for me. 24 million and 23 for the buyers. So that's way too narrow a margin. So that's another no. The Oneros also right here in no man's land. Honestly, you can probably buy well below 180, but yeah, 175, it's not even that much. Lose these two on some more supplies and maybe you can try to buy one. The Panther, so did go down in the month of October and has now stabilized at a slightly less expensive price, 1.1 million for the sellers, billion, excuse me, just above a billion for the buyers. And then our Purifier, I think, was a buy opportunity last week. So this one is still hovering at that low point, but starting to turn around here as well. So you're probably too late to buy. 22.8 for the sellers, 21.4 for the buyers, and I basically think that you're not gonna grab a buy order at this point anymore, so you can still buy pretty cheaply on the chart. Again, you know, I'm hoping that we see volatility again, which this one had done, first one up to 35 million in late September, so that one had the opportunity. But I wouldn't, you know, bet the farm on it. I would just, you know, slowly buy and hope that you can take advantage of some of these rides. Then we've got the Scimitar, that's flat around 190. Yeah, you know, going back up here, so I don't think you'll be able to grab a cheap buyer at the moment. The Widow sort of confirming that cheaper situation at the moment. For Take-Two, 1.1 billion, a little bit above that as well for the sellers, and just above a billion for the buyers. And then we've got the Zealot finally, that, alright, moves back up, and here we go. If we spot, which I think we spotted this one in mid-September as well, as a low point playing with the 180 mark. I'm assuming here, I'm not exactly sure, that 5-day moving average is still pretty high compared to it, but that you could have bought a Zealot below 180 million mid-September, and so now you are able to sell it for 218 million. So you get a it's not a great profit, but almost 40 million. So that's definitely a decent one, but those buyers are still really low at 190. So it remains risky and difficult to really get your very best prices here. But yeah, Zealot, Cerberus, Ishtar, yeah, a little bit too slow. Guardian doing a pull up that's at least somewhat steep, so first signs that perhaps volatility is starting to come back in the Take-Two markets are here, although again it's only the very first few signs. It could all die off pretty quickly as well, so we'll have to keep an eye on it in the next few weeks. And then our Tech-3 ships coming in at 4150. And then refuses to ride again. Let's get started as always with the destroyers. Here is the Confessor chart, still holding at almost 50 million ISK, 50 million for the sellers, 42 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours 38.10, so definitely drawing in some supply to keep things in check, but pretty damn expensive on the chart. Hecate still above 50 million as well. 51 for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours here, just regular supply, so nothing that's gonna crash the price just yet. Then we get the Jackdaw. That one did pull back, alright, so that should be a lot of supply. Look at that, going down all the way to 45 million, whereas the last couple of months we were above 50 million ISK, so 45 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. And you can see here, 1 to 2 days ago, we crashed the price from 52 to 45 million very quickly, but 105, 48, 33, 33, 65, 33, that's a hell of a lot of ships. that is of course going to crash the price back down. But all of this should give the Svepel breathing room, and yet you can see that I tried to buy a Svepel at 39 million ISK. Let's take a look at that chart, and this is why. I actually went to Jita, took a quick look at what was happening, and I noticed this, despite the fact that the confessor is still above or close to 50, still above 50. Now a first pullback to 45 million for the Jackdaw, which is just a normal price, I would say, for a Tech 3 destroyer, but this on massive supplies over the last 48 hours, and yet this Svepel is still going down in price here again as well. 41 million for the sellers, 39 million for most buyers, so I think this one will have been mine. Which means that I probably won't trigger that Svepel buyer, because I always count including the taxes, so that 39 is going to be that 38 for 40. I'm really sure that that's mine, but yeah, people are coming in way more aggressively all of a sudden. I think they're seeing the same writing on the wall, and then this chart just doesn't make sense when you're looking at this, and at that over the last couple of months. Yet there it is. And so unfortunately some other buyers spotted it, came in, and I didn't materialize this buy order, but this felt like something I had to try. If I could have bought including taxes for 39 million, and we did get just a normalization to 45 million on the sellers, you're looking at a trade. Unfortunately, I was not the only one, and closer margins are definitely doable, it seems, for other traders. But yeah, for the destroyers, I think we will stop the bleeding here, and then my expectation is still that the Svepel can make its way back to 45 million, as the Confessor and the Hecate still need more supplies to bring their prices back down to 45 million as well. Then we've got the cruiser markets. Here is the Legion chart, going back up slightly, but this doesn't feel like it's speculation worthy. 190 million to 171 million for this one. I would say, yeah, slightly more expensive, but again, it's definitely less of a daunting proposition to fly a Tech 3 cruiser now that they don't lose skill points anymore. Loki still below 200 million, so sure, 199 million is expensive for a Tech 3 cruiser, but it is also, of course, considered to be the best one at the moment. 180 million for the buyers feels normal. Proteus above 180, 184 to 171. Not much to say. The least popular one is also the cheapest one. And then I think the Tengu is doing quite well. Yep, 200 million right here almost for the sellers. 182 million for the buyers. Decent margin, decent supplies. There's not much to say. These Tech 3 cruisers are definitely finding their range. It's relatively expensive considering the full 1 year chart, but it completely does make sense to me. Tengu, amazing PvE platform. Missile launchers, always great weapon systems. So that's normal that this one is expensive. Loki just has those crazy double armor bonuses, so you can do so much stuff with a Loki. That one makes sense as well. Legion, just overall a very good platform as well, I would say, and being able to have a missile / drone combination, I think makes it very strong. And then the Proteus, yeah, unfortunately doesn't have the best weapon system, way more niche, you could say, in its usages, especially PvE wise, and so this one is the cheapest one, but overall the ranges are also pretty close to one another, so nothing too crazy to report here in the Tech 3 ship markets. And yeah, so this one is probably gonna fail unless we, later down the line see another drawback. And then Manticore bought for 27. Well, we could maybe sell at pretty much equilibrium at this point, but including taxes, it won't be much. So it's still too early. Let's hope that volatility does indeed return to the Tech 2 ship market. And then finally, for the extra product of the week, I'm choosing the mining ships. I touched on it in the last video, so let's go at 4720. Because of we do know one thing that potentially will change in the in Q4. I mean, it was definitely, I think, like sort of announced, strongly hinted at, that a rebalancing of the mining ships is on the books, and there were definitely also indications that they were looking into gas compression and moon goo, moon ore compression. It's not moon goo anymore, it doesn't flow for free. Let's go with the mining barges first. So here is the Kovter, relatively cheap, still below 40 million, 38.4 for the sellers, less than 35 million for the buyers. On this 1 year chart, that's definitely doable. Then we get a procurer, expensive compared to a year ago, but compared to what it was on the April, industry changes, definitely a lot better as well. 38 for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. And then finally the retriever is relatively cheap as well, even below 35 million for the sellers and 33 million for the buyers. All right, interesting. Mining barges, I would say Tech 1 relatively cheap at the moment. Thinking about what could CCP announce? Well, if you do expect big nerfs for the Orca and for the Rorqual in their mining capabilities, that could make this an interesting set of charts. Let's see what Tech 2 is doing though. Here is the Hulk chart. Just went down to 1 year low point below 230 million and bounced back up, probably on the tax changes and just in response to that. 255 million for the sellers, 228 million for the buyers. Basically relatively cheap as well on this full 1 year chart. The Mackinac is currently going to a 1 year low point below 200 million. Yeah, 185 for the buyers, pretty narrow margin. We're still just on the downside, so maybe you can buy a Mackinac below 200 million at the moment. All right, interesting looking to me again as well. And same thing, oh no, this is the exact same chart, but here is the skiff. Just did that 1 year low point, touched almost 200 million. Look at the volume response and we are back up. 243 for the sellers, 220 for the buyers. Definitely a little bit more expensive on this 1 year chart, but if you're looking for safety, tank capability, of course the skiff is your go-to at the moment. Worst yield, but definitely able to tank crazy stuff. So this is interesting. This is definitely interesting. All of these mining barges tend to be in relatively low price points, except for the skiff. If people are feeling like gambling on potentially what CCP might announce for changes to mining ships, and then you want to say that, yeah, we're just gonna need way more hulks and mining barges out there in order to mine because of what's happening to the Orca and the Rorqual, this could be an opportunity. This does feel to me like if I were to gamble on a Tech 2 ship now, it would definitely be the Mackinac, because that one has the full combination of being really cheap right now and potentially seeing big changes to its advantage being announced in the next quarter. So we still have our Orca to take a look at as well. Let's actually close everything as I keep misclicking. Let's go Orca. Here is the Orca chart, and this one might just be the exact opposite or not, of course, you never know. This is pure gambling and we don't know what CCP might announce, but it's 2 billion ISK for the sellers of the Orca, 1.85 billion for the buyers. And so if we go here, I want to take a quick look at industry, if I can view that. In industry, take a quick look at input output at the moment, just going like that. Input cost is still at 2 billion ISK, output cost 1.8 billion, so still not economical basically. Although here these sell prices are right on that input cost, so we are starting to normalize our large ship production costs as well. Industry wise, yeah, this is the real question, of course, and you can see there's not that many available. If the Orca's compression can then make up for it enough that it, when it might lose some of its mining capability, it's still a gamble, guys. But yeah, on the Orca, I would not bet on these prices to go that much higher on the announcement. On the contrary, we might actually see less demand for the ship due to that one, but I could be wrong on this, so I will fully admit, and I probably have to say this, I have zero information. I don't even want the information beforehand or anything like that. To me, whatever CCP will announce will be a complete surprise as well, so these are just my thoughts on the matter, but it looks kinda interesting. If you look at the smaller mining ships, which I would imagine could see a boost, even just a relative boost, by nerfing some of the big boys. But we will see, of course, what CCP decides to do. They could go completely out of left field as well, and for instance come up with Edencom and Triglavian mining ships or something like that. So we really don't know what might happen. But yeah, at the moment I would say mining barges on the relatively cheap side. Rorquals in all likeliness crazy expensive on the industry changes, and that makes for an interesting market for CCP to have to rebalance those ships then. But we'll see what comes next, of course. For now, that's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching and listening, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.